Great to have us all back together for this final session. We knew that if we had a hard-hitting lineup like this for our last session, everyone would come, and it's absolutely played out like this. So great to have you here. We're excited about this because it's not every day that Pharmac say yes to coming and being open and having a discussion, which is what the next hour is about. And my job is to be as invisible as possible in this. I'm technically the MC, so I'm going to make sure that we're not still here at 5 o'clock, and we will keep things nice and tight. And there will be a chance for questions at the end. But first and foremost, I'm here to be invisible. Two really important points. One is to reflect us as a blood cancer community, and my job at LBC is to advocate for access to medicines. And I don't want to mess around. I just want to say that I think as a community, we feel that we have been underserved by Pharmac and the budget that they have been given. And I don't say that in a inflammatory way for our guests. I say that just to acknowledge the atmosphere that I have experienced in the months that I have been with LBC. There are exceptions to that, and there are people that have access to the medicines that they need. But overall, that is my read on our community. And it's been reinforced by discussions I have had. And, respectfully, I had a conversation with somebody in the room here today who has spent $300,000 accessing a medicine that is available in 48 other countries, daratumumab. But I've also spoken with others who can't afford that and go without. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and describe that elephant in the room and just let that be part of what this is about. But I also want to acknowledge that when we sent the invite to Pharmac, we did that because this is a really exciting time. And for the first time in many, many years, Pharmac is saying, you know what, we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that patient communities feel that they are being underserved. And they acknowledge that there needs to be more dialogue. And actually there is already expectations that Pharmac changes. And so many people, I collaborate with chief execs across the whole sector, and we are excited about what is ahead of us and the opportunity and what has been set as a platform for engagement. And so while I acknowledge the history and the challenges and the reality for us right now, I just also want to acknowledge and thank you for when I talk about the organisation, just for the platform that we have to engage openly and actually look constructively at the future. But to you personally for saying yes and for giving up your weekends and for flying across the country and for being with us to have this discussion, because it means a lot to us as a community. I'm not being very invisible, I'm sorry. So, I don't do that very well. So I haven't even introduced our guests. And so I'm going to do that in a very light touch way because I want them to add to the introduction and put their own context on who they are and why they're at the table today. And so let's start with Paula, because Paula Bennett is somebody that will be very familiar to probably everybody in the room as a former Prime Minister, as a proud Westie.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Did I say Prime Minister?
Yeah.
I just gave you.
One more.
Yeah.
No.
I was an invisible Prime Minister.
Can I promise you that it does say, I didn't just give you a promotion, it did say deputy here.
There's always time, Paula.
Yeah.
Proud Westie, and now chair of the board in the last 6 months?
3.
3 months. Okay. All right. Seeming I've made a hash of that, was there anything you'd like to add to your own introduction?
Oh, do you want me to?
Yeah, we'll do it one by one.
Kia ora everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So yes, I am. I feel like I should stand up because I can't see everybody. I'm Paula and proud Westie and absolutely wrapped. So I started in my role in May, so it really has been only about 3.5 months. But I also work at Bailey's, so I love it there. I'm a director and do commercial. I podcast. I do all sorts of things. And for me, it just got to that point over the Christmas break in particular, where I went, I've got a particular set of experience and hopefully a particular set of skills, and I wanted to do some public service again. And I didn't want to be a politician. So for me, this is what I hope is my give back, is by stepping into this role because I want to see change.
Awesome. Thank you. And to Paula's right, yes, to Paula's right, is Todd Stephenson. And Todd is an MP for ACT. And based on the list here, he is also a spokesperson for pretty much everything.
Quite a lot of things, yes.
Including health. But is also what's called a parliamentary private secretary to David Seymour, which essentially means that he's very close to the conversations around Pharmac.
Free labour.
Free labour. And Todd has worked for many years in the pharmaceutical industry, mostly in Australia for the last 17 years. And, you know, I mentioned I started in February. One of the most approachable politicians you'll ever meet about very specific issues of concern to us. So just thank you for both being here and for being so open and approachable, and I'll let you extend your introduction.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me, Tim. And this is an amazing turnout. I actually only returned to New Zealand about a year ago. So last August, I moved back to New Zealand just to take on, go to Parliament and try and make a difference. And as Tim said, I've spent my entire recent career actually working in the medicines industry, but within that actually involved in patient advocacy. So actually involved in helping, I was on a couple of groups. One was actually an international group involved in patient input into health technology assessment, which was really, really interesting, and also helped set up another group in Australia called the Patient Voice Initiative, which again was a patient-led initiative just to try and get more decision-making into the healthcare system. So I'm really delighted to be here. I totally agree with you. Well, it's more than just blood cancer patients have been underserved in New Zealand. All patients have been underserved in New Zealand by treatments. And that's one of the things, you know, I've noticed so starkly. Obviously, followed it from Australia, but even coming back. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, to try and make a difference. And again, we can talk about how we're going to do that. But yeah, it's great to be here. And I mean, this is an amazing turnout.
Thank you, Todd. And David Hughes, Dr. David Hughes.
Thank you. Only my mother calls me doctor, but that's very sweet of you, Tim.
So David, again, I've had discussions with and interaction with, and what I love about this panel is that we have the three levels of politics, of governance, and of operations within Pharmac. And David represents that in terms of heading up all of the medical considerations, but also the assessment process, which gets very technical very quickly. But whatever your interests and questions are, that many have been pre-submitted, but at the end, actually we've got great coverage here. But David's fantastic at keeping us informed at some of the detail and the technical level, and has been with Pharmac for several years. But I'll let you add to your own introduction again.
Kia ora tato. Yes, so I'm David Hughes. I'm originally from Wales. In fact, I'm so Welsh. My mother's maiden name was also Hughes. Now I'll let you think of that. I'm not really good at the banjo. Apparently my grandfathers weren't related. I've been here since 1993. I've worked for a long time in mental health, and certainly during that time worked very closely with consumers, and indeed was part of the process of development of peer support and patient workers within mental health. I then moved. I was lucky enough, I became a little obsessed with patient safety and quality, and what happened in hospitals when things went bad. And certainly, again, during that time, brought patient and consumer advocates into the serious adverse event review process, which was seen as impossible before that. So it's great to be here. This is actually my third work anniversary at Pharmac. Before that, I was at Counties Manukau for 22 years in a number of roles. But yeah, lovely to be here. And hopefully my talk won't be too technical. But if there are things that you don't understand, just let me know, and I'll try and explain them. Cheers.
Thank you to you all for coming. So just a bit of an outline on how this is going to run. So we've asked the team here to chat for 10 minutes about a topic that we kind of agreed would be of interest and relevant to their role within the Pharmac landscape. So we'll hear that for 10 minutes, and then there'll be some questions that I'm keen to throw at the panel, and we'll see I don't know what they are yet, but we'll work that out. We previously asked you to submit any questions, and we got so many, and a lot of them were very specific to your situations, which are incredibly important, but because this is only an hour, we have had to aggregate them in some way. So I do apologise for that, but there will be an opportunity. We'll ask those questions, and Rosie, who many of you will know, will introduce Rosie shortly. She will facilitate that, and at the end, we'll make sure that we have 10 minutes for some questions from the floor with the roaming mic. So that's how it's going to play out. And I will step down now, and I'll hand over to, I believe it's you, Todd?
Yeah.
Todd's going to start with an outline, which is a great place to start, of the future vision for Pharmac.
Thanks, Tim. I might come up to this little lectern. I'm pretty short, but hopefully you can see me. Look, and I just want to thank Paula actually and David for being here too. I think it's, and again, we're going to talk a bit about the cultural change we're trying to instill in Pharmac, but I think it's really great that you're both here today. So what I'm just going to talk a little bit about is, really what our vision for Pharmac is. And again, Minister Seymour sends his regards to everyone. So I suppose it kind of started off with the coalition negotiations, and ACT specifically asked for some health responsibilities, which I think might have surprised some people. But again, for the last few years, we've been closely following, particularly in the medicines area, what we think were some of the issues. And so David's ended up with responsibility for two big areas. One is MedSafe, which is obviously the regulator, so that's the body that actually approves medicines and treatments, and then Pharmac. And obviously going to talk mainly about Pharmac, but I do think it is important just to mention, touch on MedSafe, because obviously you can't get a funded treatment unless it's been approved by the regulator. And so we are, we have some initiatives there to actually speed up even MedSafe approval. And again, I know in the previous talk when Rosie was presenting, there was some questions about how we can make MedSafe faster. And so one of the things we're going to do is what we call the rule of two. So if two other countries that we respect, so say the UK and Australia have approved a medicine, we want that same medicine approved in New Zealand within 30 days. And we're working actively on that right now. So again, we can talk a little bit more about MedSafe, but then I just want to kind of move on to Pharmac. And again, some of you would have heard Rosie's talk earlier, and she actually outlined kind of the three principles of a good health technology assessment agency, which I think was really good. And I'm just going to talk about those because it actually touches nicely on our kind of thinking. And so those three principles were independence, transparency and credibility. And so independence is really important. And so Pharmac is what we call a crown entity. And so we have Paula as the chair of the board, and there's board members, and they actually manage that organisation on behalf of the government. And so again, that means that politicians don't interfere day to day with the running of Pharmac. We don't have any decision-making power about what medicines get funded and don't get funded. But what we can do is outline to the organisation what is expected, and actually also obviously change their policy and statutory settings. So independence is really important, and the Minister's been very clear that we're going to maintain that independence, but it doesn't mean we can't improve the organisation. The other two were transparency and credibility. And so again, transparency is very important. The community needs to understand how an organisation is making decisions, what inputs go into those decisions. And again, Pharmac does some of that, but I think there's more that can be done around, again, getting input from consumers and also just making sure people understand how decision is made, which again leads into credibility. Does the New Zealand public have a confidence that this organisation is acting in its best interests and is doing what is needed? And again, I think, again, by having people being more transparent, having people understand the process and even input into it, I think we can start to build credibility. And so what the Minister did, which is one of his levers, is he can write a letter, which is called the Letter of Expectations to Pharmac. And that's a 5-page letter. It's publicly available. So again, if you want to go and read it, you can just go to the Pharmac website. And I'm sure Paula's going to touch on this, but that's basically a letter to Paula to say, this is what we would like you to focus on as an organisation. And in that, we've actually set out some quite big issues and challenges. And, again, I'll talk broadly about what they are, but they are things like the organisational culture of Pharmac. And again, Pharmac is actually about just over 30 years old. And it's an organisation which was created when actually medicines and treatments were totally different from what they are today. And so it was possible to bulk buy medicines and get discounts back then, but just the way things are developed now, it's totally different. And we have, rapid innovation of treatments and medicines. And so again, I think that's just part of the landscape that has changed. I think also community expectations have changed. Again, just like other public organisations, people expect a lot more interaction and engagement and transparency. And so again, just asking really Pharmac to look at its organisational culture, how it does things, how it works with others. We also kind of have outlined a big bucket of issues around the statutory role of Pharmac. And again, for those who were here earlier when Rosie was talking, Pharmac does actually have a very narrow statutory objective, and that is basically to use its fixed budget to buy as many treatments as possible. And so, again, I don't know where we'll land on this, but we've just said, well, is that still the right statutory objective for this organisation? Or can we actually think about other benefits across government that a treatment might deliver, societal benefits, and then what would that mean for the statutory objective? So again, we don't have it's just kind of an open question, but just to say, well, is that still appropriate in this day and age? And then there's other more technical things around HTA. Obviously, Pharmac is both the value assessor of a medicine and the procurer. And so, is that the right combination for the organisation to be doing, or is that, just needs to be reviewed? And then there's all these other ways now that health technology assessment bodies like Pharmac now can work with stakeholders, getting earlier input, different types of evidence, and again, something we've clearly set out in the letter of expectations is that can we look at the broader value that a treatment might deliver? And so, a treatment might allow people to return to work faster so that they can actually pay taxes. It might free up hospital capacity. There's all kinds of other things that often a treatment does that may not be fully accounted. And again, this is quite a new area of, I suppose, value assessment even globally. But I know Pharmac are up for the challenge of looking at this and actually working with some of the other agencies globally that try to do this and just look at that broader value. And then finally, I think it is really around this idea of partnership and collaboration. And again, it just seems longer than 3 months, Paula, but I remember Paula's basically her first day on the job was actually the Medicines Access Summit in Wellington, where again, last year when I came into Parliament, I knew Malcolm Mulholland from Patient Voice Aotearoa, and I knew the Chief Executive of Medicines New Zealand, and I said to them, actually, let's get people together. Let's actually just have a summit and talk about these issues. And we had that, obviously 3 months ago.
I hadn't even started.
Haven't even started yet. I couldn't remember if you'd been announced or not.
I was announced, but I hadn't started.
That's right. But so that was really Paula's first day on the job, and that's where I knew that Paula was going to be great to be heading up the Pharmac board because she's actually keen to get out, talk to people, understand their issues. And again, we're not going to solve all of the challenges we face overnight, but we're certainly up for at least talking about them. I'm probably just going to leave it there now because I'm sure there'll be more opportunities for ask questions in a minute. But hopefully it gives you a bit of an outline of where we're heading. Oh, sorry, the bit I didn't... in the question too was about the specifics for blood cancers. And I suppose, again, what we want to do is get the settings right for all treatments. And I hope that will have a flow-on effect to specifically blood cancers. As I said, I know that we're underserved in New Zealand for treatments, and so hopefully we can start to address that. The other thing that's obviously been exciting this year has been the substantial uplift to Pharmac. Again, that was a record investment. And so again, that will, and I know David will talk probably a bit more about the specifics, but that was really a recognition that we needed to do more. Thank you.
Cool.
Lovely.
I might go and sit down so I can watch his slides.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Todd. Just a wee observation there. That is a talk that would normally come from an opposition MP, which is...
What do you mean?
No, that's the refreshing bit.
We're doing politics differently.
Yeah, that's the refreshing bit, right? It's acknowledging that it's not working and that we need to do more, which we appreciate. So thank you. We also want you to deliver on that and see the specificity of it.
Wow.
But we appreciate it. I'm not going to... Yeah, I've already introduced you, so
Cool,
come on
that's
up.
good. All right. Kia ora. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Saturday afternoon. I'm a little anxious about the rugby tonight, but Stuart says it's all going to be fine. Thank you, Stuart. All right. So, yes, I'm David. What am I going to talk about? Where Pharmac fits into the health system, where we spend the money, how we make those funding decisions, and indeed, what is next for Pharmac. So, how do we fit into the New Zealand health system? Now, I've adapted this infographic from the Ministry of Health. It's changed a lot. I've therefore had to adapt it. I'll take a little moment just for you to have a look at all those new and existing health entities. On the right there, we have Pharmac. Up on the top left, we have MedSafe. Down on the left hand, we have Health New Zealand. Up top, Cancer Control Agency. With the announcement of the $604 million over the next 4 years, I can assure you that Health New Zealand, the Cancer Control Agency, MedSafe, and Pharmac are meeting twice, 3 times a week to get these medicines funded and into patients. And indeed, I'll talk more about that in a little while. It's really good. So Paula's allowed me to use a few of her minutes because honestly, I can't speak for just 10 minutes. And if I tried, there would be kind of strobing lights with the slides going really quickly. So despite the many recent changes in the health system, our statutory objective has indeed remained the same, as Todd noted. So, to secure for eligible people in need of pharmaceuticals the best health outcomes that are reasonably achievable from pharmaceutical treatment and from within the amount of funding provided. And let's have a look at a couple of things there. So, as Todd said, we are tasked with securing the best health outcomes, but there has indeed been much discussion about whether we should be looking at non-health outcomes. So for example, productivity, return to work, informal carer costs and resources. I'll maybe get Paula to talk a little bit more about our plans in that. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus, Paula. And the second thing is, which is very different, and again, this is something Todd spoke about. We're very different from similar agencies worldwide because we're not only the decision maker, we are also the holder of a capped budget for funding of pharmaceuticals. Thank you. So we are a Crown agency and we give effect to government policy as directed by the responsible minister, Minister Seymour. And we're funded out of Vote Health, separate from the funding of hospitals and primary care. We manage the funding of community and hospital medicines, and we also negotiate for hospital medical devices. Okay, so let's look a little closer at the funding provided. The good news, as we've heard, in June 2024, Pharmac received an additional $604 million over 4 years. And this budget uplift has meant that we've indeed been able to rapidly move to fund many new medicines from our options for investment list. Now, the team of 5 million New Zealanders are now spending $6.50 per week per head on their medicines. That's like a regular flat white but no extras. Definitely no soy or almond milk. Now, it's a difficult comparison because certainly what's in, what's out of these international comparisons is not clear. But Dr. Roger Tiedemann told me the other day that Australia spends, on average, $16 to $18 per head per week on their pharmaceutical. Here we go. The dollar value of the medicines budget has more than doubled over the last 10 years, and the great majority of that increase occurred recently, with $600 million added to the total annual budget since the end of June 2020. And that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Sounds like an amazing, and look at that graph. However, if you consider our budget as a percentage of vote health, the recent uplift has enabled us to remain at about the level of 6.5% of the overall health budget. And indeed, without the recent uplift of $604 million, we would have lost significant ground. So, what have we done so far with the uplift? We predicted that we would be able to fund up to medicines for up to 54 conditions. And consultations are underway or completed for 38 of those applications, including those that are listed above. The funding for the first group, pembrolizumab for Hodgkin, breast, bladder, etc., kicks off on Tuesday, which is remarkable, a remarkable turnaround. We had the consultation out within 7 days of the confirmation of the extra funding. And as I say, we have really worked hard. It's been great work. This is the work that Pharmac staff love to do. And there's more to come. So funding, there'll be waves of consultation over the next few months as we continue to work through the remaining applications. Now, of course, where we're up to involves a lot of negotiations with suppliers that are happening right now. They're happening behind closed doors. And so it's going to be difficult for me to share where those negotiations are. I hope you can understand that. I would have loved to have been able to come here today and say, I know what the 4 blood cancer medicines that are going to be funded. I do know one of them, which is obviously Pembro for Hodgkin's, but I don't know what the other 3 are going to be. I know, because I am aware of where those negotiations, where their settings are, but I can't tell you, because of confidentiality, where we're up to. I'm sorry about that. So what I can do is to tell you how we do decide which medicines to fund generally. Yeah. So if we keep this as a general level, let's have a look at the journey of a funding decision. Yeah. So we start with an application, usually from a pharmaceutical company, a supplier, but we also may receive applications from a clinician or members of the public. So we're one of the few health technology agencies in the world to receive applications from members of the public. And the reason for that is we don't charge an application fee. And we get around 90 to 100 applications per year, and that the journey towards funding has many stages. And I've simplified those in the little diagram at the bottom. But clinical advice and critical appraisal is at the evidence of this process. And indeed, our clinical advice network is the envy of similar agencies over the world. Our main advice comes from PTAC, the Pharmacology and Therapeutics Advisory Committee. And it's an expert committee of clinical practitioners, and they consider the clinical evidence around funding proposals and take into account Pharmac's factors for consideration. And I'll tell you a bit about those later. PTAC interacts with 21 specialist advisory committees across a whole range. Hopefully you can see some of them there: mental health, neurology, kidney disease. And over 140 health professionals provide us with expert clinical advice to assist our assessment of funding proposals. And we also go back to them between committee meetings to ask questions of them and for them to provide more ad hoc advice. In the last 18 months, we've recruited a number of consumer members to sit on these committees. We have a small number of consumers members who cover a wide variety of committees, and these roles are hugely challenging. The consumers are full members of the committee, and they have voting rights and really do feel the pressure of that responsibility on their shoulders. These fine people are the members of our Cancer Treatment Advisory Committee. As you can see, there are 4 haematologists on the committee. The Cancer Treatments Advisory Committee is one of the busiest committees we have. It meets 3 times a year. It's not surprising. 1 in 3 of our applications is for a cancer treatment, and no doubt over time that will increase further. At the core of Pharmac's decision-making are the factors for consideration. They are health need, health benefits, suitability, and costs. And these health impacts are considered at 3 levels: the individual, family and whānau, and the health system. If you're tempted to read through any of our recent committee records, which are a bit dense, I have to say, you'll see that each record will have these considerations identified. So you can see how our factors for consideration are taken into account. And in fact, you could go and have a look at the factors for consideration that we took into account for daratumumab online on our website. Now, here we go. Following a recommendation for our clinical advisors, and sometimes indeed in parallel, our health economists undertake their assessments. Now, most frequently that includes a cost-utility analysis, once again using the factors for consideration. And the consumer voice is very much at the heart of a cost-utility analysis. So the assessment for a CUA is driven by patient-reported outcome measures such as the EQ5D or the SF36. If you've been to treatments, gone to your doctor, maybe even your physio. I went to the physio the other day and I was asked to fill in an EQ5D. Essentially asks you questions about how well you're functioning, eating, sleeping, moving, those things. So very much driving the patient voice and the patient experience, albeit in a very structured and considered way. And so once we've assessed those proposals, we decide whether we should put the application on one of our lists. So the OFI, our options for investment list, is the treatments indeed we would choose to fund if we had headroom in the budget. But there are also treatments that we would fund only if they were cost neutral or cost saving when compared to existing funds. And there are also proposals that we would decline. There are 132 proposals on the OFI for 93 products. We list them and rank them in order of our priority, but when we put them on the website, you'll see them in alphabetical order, because obviously it's quite commercially sensitive, the ranking. Of interest for this audience on the OFI currently, inotuzumab for ALL, venetoclax with azacitidine, for AML, daratumumab for multiple myeloma, carfilzomib for multiple myeloma, zanubrutinib for mantle cell lymphoma, and ibrutinib widened access for CLL. So prioritization of the OFI is a multi-criteria social decision-making process where members of Pharmac staff meet together and consider summary information that is drawn from the cost utility analysis, budget impact assessment, health need, equity considerations, and whether the condition being treated is a government health priority. And we've just had one of those. It is a pretty intense afternoon. The passion, the commitment, the responsibility that Pharmac staff feel when a new application is brought to the OFI is incredible. And we really do take our work incredibly seriously. What are the main influences? Okay, here's a bit of data. I'm not sure I was allowed to show this to you, but I'm going to because I've taken all the details off, yeah? And also it's from 2022, but it was really important to get a sense of how indeed we prioritize things, yeah? So if you look, the application that given the most priority is on your top left-hand corner, yeah? So that's number 1 on our list, and number whatever it was back in 2022 is down on the right-hand corner. Now, on the y-axis, so the up and down axis, that's cost utility, yeah? And you can see that there's quite a clear relationship between cost utility and ranking, yeah? And if you did some kind of fancy maths that my fancy maths people can do, they say, yes, it's a really strong relationship between the two. But you can see that there's a few outliers, can't you? Back in 2022, there they are. And these were treatments these are treatments for conditions for whom the patients had extreme health need. So they were treatments for spinal muscular atrophy and cystic fibrosis. And indeed, I can tell you that now because we funded them. We funded risdiplam, nusinersen, and Trikafta when we got that first budget boost. So indeed, it is not just cost utility, because we know that cost utility can favor changes in people's wellness, but underrepresent life-extending treatment. So we very much take into account health need. We also, when we ran the maths, we identified that about a 10 to 15% change was also associated when a treatment affected or was for predominantly for groups with the highest health needs within our populations. Okay, I'm nearly there. Thank you for sticking with me. So what's next? As Todd said so well, our letter of expectation. I'm going to focus and hopefully then bridge to Paula about better engaging with consumers. As I say, we've made some small steps. We need to take bigger steps. I'm committed to it. I've worked, as I said, over my career engaging with bringing consumers into the system so that other consumers can benefit. And it's my 3rd anniversary at Pharmac. We're making some progress. I think the work that Paula is just about to kick off is going to make a real step change for us. So thank you. I say once again, I'm sorry that I couldn't come here with more clear news about treatments that you are, very, very interested and keen to hear about. But I have hope, which is, possibly not enough for today. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you.
That was good. Look, I'm not going to take up too much time because I want to hear from you and hear your questions and go from there. But so 3.5 months in the job, and it's fascinating. So I'm a change agent. So that's what I do. If the minister was looking for someone to manage something, then I certainly was not the right person for that. So from my perspective, Pharmac is up for change. And it needs to. But I think what we've proven in the last couple of months is that if given the funding, they can fund things and they can do it quickly. And I will stick up for them and say there's incredibly smart, clever, caring people within that organisation that sit there watching at least 132 medicines just on the list and 90 to 100 applications coming in every year. And if they had the funding, they would be funding far more medicines more quickly than they're currently doing. So they have, though, and it's where the letter of expectations comes from, I think, as an organisation, kind of intracted a little bit instead of looking outwards. And that, I think, is from a combination of having to say no more than you're saying yes. So it's not what they want to do. So as a consequence of that, instead of kind of getting front-facing, spending more time with consumers, spending more time actually getting into negotiations, they've kind of withdrawn a bit, got defensive and backed off. So my job is, in part, is to turn that around. Right? So that's what we're doing. So we've got consumer engagement workshops where I have got a small number of people. Tim's going to be there, and we are literally going to sit down and we're going to dissect, because he didn't show you the most complicated way that they do assessments and things. I call it the snake because it goes like this. And when do we consult? How do we do it? How do we get more front-facing while also staying true to the clinical expertise and making sure, though, that we have an open and a fair process? And there's no one that can do that better, in part, than the people that are so close to it and advocating on your behalf. Secondly, I did want to just touch on social investment, societal impacts. You'll hear it called both of those things. It's kind of my baby. So I started it in welfare, many, many years ago. It's fascinating, and there will be strong evidence for some medicines that if you funded them earlier, if you funded them quickly, that it will have more than just a health benefit. It will have a wider benefit, as was sort of indicated in many, many different ways, whether that's someone being able to be more productive and be in work, whether or not it's the carers that would be looking after them, and you can kind of see where that goes. Where my head's at the moment, because it's changing every week, right now I'm caught in, we've got to watch out for the unintended consequences. So from my perspective, and the ministers and Todd might have different, but this is why it's a trial. We keep going, and as long as we're learning fast and feeding that back in. But from my perspective, I can't see how every medicine or medical device would go through that, because there will be times that you're funding something just because it's the damn right thing to do. It's palliative, it's pain relief, it's something that actually is going to be pretty tight. If you ran it through for an 85-year-old, it might look quite different than running it something through for. So you've got to be really careful that we are the New Zealand that we want to be, and that kind of caring society that's looking broader. But if we can show, in some cases, that there genuinely is these wider societal impacts, then you would think that that would be have a better chance of getting more funding. You can change the law. As I say to Pharmac, don't defend what you're doing. You're working within the law. You're given a fixed budget. Trust me, they spend every single penny of it. They are not a fat, wasteful organisation by any way, shape or means. And if given the opportunity, they would spend a lot more. And I think that with the competing health needs that we have at the moment, it is other people's problems now on how they fund and whether they do. And we've got to put up the best case that we possibly can to make sure that we're seeing that budget continue to grow. But we spend a lot more money in a whole lot of other areas. And, thank goodness for the ministers for stepping up. It's the first time that Pharmac has had its own minister. In the past, it's always come under the Minister of Health. And so it's kind of been the third cousin, not the first, whereas now we've got a minister that really is focused on the organisation and on seeing more funding go in wherever possible. But trust me, there's going to be a whole lot of competing bids out there, and that's going to be a real challenge. Keep hope. These guys are working, I'm not kidding, they're working weekends. We've got, because it's such a specialist and expertise area, we've got ex-staff that have gone to do the OE that we've roped in doing assessments and getting medicines through, because as soon as we were given that money, as I say, within 7 days, we had medicines going out for consultation. 38 is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. To put that in perspective, I think for the whole year, last year, they did something like 28 assessments. For the month of July alone, they did 21. And we're now up to 38 that they've done in just a matter of like 2.5 months. So they are moving quickly. They do want to see better access, but there equally needs to be a whole lot of change, and we're up for it. Right, let's get to questions.
Well, thank you for taking us through that and for sharing your perspective. I want to get very quickly to the questions that have been pre-submitted and then be able to pass the mic around before we need to wind this up. I've only got one question, and that's just to address the theme that was common throughout all of the presentations and talks. One, and that is that the talk before from Rosie highlighted that of the 30 OECD countries, relative to our GDP, we are 30th. We are dead last in our medicine spend. And so, Paula, to hear you say that, and to take that further, even with the $600 million uplift, we are still dead last in the OECD. And so we celebrate 600 million, but we also go, that's nowhere near enough. We're talking about increments towards still being bottom. And I just struggle with the idea that there isn't a plan for transformative change where we need billions of dollars to clear 135 medicines that we agree are needed and are cost effective and will save and extend lives, and we're talking about increments because of, there's other things, there's roads that are more important. How do you respond to someone like me that just gets so agitated by that?
You're talking to the wrong people. There's not one person on this panel that would disagree with you. We don't have the power to put that money in.
So let me reframe that. How do we as a country then, if you're not in control of that, how do we as a country act on that and get transformative change that doesn't just take us an inch forward?
I would just say, I can speak for these two in that respect. There's no one that would disagree with you here. You know what I mean? Like, we want to fight for every dollar we possibly can to go into medicines and the health of New Zealanders and better access, and we will fight for that with everything that we've got in a highly competitive environment where the country's bloody broken everywhere and broke. Look, I give this a lot of thought, and some of it, and I sort of indicated to you a bit earlier, Tim. You look at the news on any particular day. Is that me? Oh no. You look at the news on any particular day. You read the paper, and it's going to pop breaking news this morning, and it's the car accident, and it's tragic, by the way. I've certainly lost family members to car accidents, so I'm not putting that down at all. But that makes the news. 80 people dying in the last couple of weeks because they didn't get access to medicines early enough. Doesn't. Right? Yeah. So you go out there and, with all respect, we were sort of talking about this the other day, about Pharmac and you care about Pharmac when you need us. Right? So the country actually doesn't, they're not, you guys and we feel so strongly about it. Because we get it and we care and we're right in the middle of it. But actually, the general public, they might go, yeah, it should. But will you pay that extra % on your taxes and have it ring-fenced for Pharmac? No, they won't. You will. I will. They won't. So, I don't know. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. I'm just not going to sugarcoat it for you, and you know that. So how do you change that?
I think in the short term, though, Paula, and you made this point, is Minister Seymour is going to be arguing for every dollar he can, because the great thing about Pharmac is you can actually show the value that it's going to deliver. There's lots of other parts of government. So again, I think, kind of putting on my political coalition government hat, when we can't, the country literally is broke and we actually are having to make really difficult decisions. But when he sits around that cabinet table, these guys are going to be able to give him the evidence to say, well, actually, if you spend money here, we're going to deliver an outcome. We're actually going to see something change, whereas something more speculative that another minister's asking for won't have the same evidence. So in the kind of the short to medium term, that's the way we want to operate. I think, there's a longer term conversation about how we actually fund healthcare and health services in New Zealand, but probably it's quite a long discussion.
Thank you. I just raised that because I think it is a frustration we have, and just to say that out loud, that it's a really tough challenge. We think put an extra $1 billion in there. Actually, it is highly political, and it needs to happen in ways that we actually don't understand, and it's very complex. So, thank you for just acknowledging that. We are going to go a little bit past the 2:45 just because the way this has played out, and we don't want to rush the patient. So the patient question. So we'll make sure that we're finished pretty much bang on 5, if that's okay. We understand if people have flights to get to. But I do just want to hand over to Rosie, who leads our advocacy work, and she has been the one, receiving your questions and shaping them up. So I'll hand over to Rosie. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, I'll try. We'll get through these and then we'll open the floor to some questions. So I'll start off with Todd. So when we're thinking about access to standard of care therapies, it's really important not only in terms of delivering quality clinical care, but it's also important for laying the foundation for future innovations. And that's how clinical development programs tend to work. So New Zealand is often excluded from clinical trials because our population lacks access to some of these treatments. Do you see Pharmac playing a role, or a future where Pharmac plays a role, in ensuring that New Zealanders do have this baseline level of access and that they're able to benefit from the clinical and economic opportunities that come with clinical trials?
Great question. I mean, certainly, we don't have access to as many clinical trials as I think we should in New Zealand. And there's 2 problems. One is, if we don't offer the standard of care, it's much harder for a company to open the clinical trial here because they would have to pay for the comparator medicine, etc. But it's an area I'm actually quite passionate about, and I'm going to do some more work on this because I do also think we've actually got some great advantages in New Zealand about why companies would want to come and do clinical trials here. We do actually have we're small, but we had quite a diverse population. And in addition to, this is my view, in addition to the clinical data that can be developed when you're doing a clinical trial, we actually do have the ability also to offer this kind of societal benefit. So again, we have this great, amazing, again, Paula probably takes some of the credit for this. We have this amazing thing called the integrated data infrastructure where we can actually match government data. And so, a study I was involved in was around people living with schizophrenia, for example, and we could actually show if you intervened with a treatment and wraparound solutions for those people, how much better that would be for our society and would actually save other parts of government money. So I think, we've got to try and get the standard of care issue tackled, but then we've actually got to do a sales job and say, to companies, come here, do your clinical development. We're also quite fast often at recruiting as well, which can be a big benefit. So, it's something I really want to work on, and there's a few people I'm going to be roping in to do that.
Nice, thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, please do.
I mean, so obviously Pharmac uses clinical research. It's the base of what we do. So we really want to support clinical research. And so working through some of those difficult, challenging parts where indeed, yes, the standard of care treatments for an Australian trial aren't funded here. Very difficult. My first answer is let's get those treatments funded. But how do we do that with the budget? We've just had that discussion. So are there other ways that we can work through? And I know that certainly in my experience back at Counties Manukau for a long time, counties invested very heavily in clinical research, and that's not the case across the board. So before we heard about the significant financial issues Health New Zealand are facing right now, I had some early discussions and very positive discussions with Health New Zealand about how we can level the playing field between districts and regions in this space. And there were some very hopeful discussions, but I say with the current financials that's been, I think we're on pause for that.
Yeah. I mean, from a financial perspective, I guess it can be clearly justified when you look at the return on investment that you can get from clinical trials, right? So if we fund those baseline therapies, we get the trials in. I think one study was like $60 to every dollar invested.
Yes, I think that's in a case where the research is in the same jurisdiction where the company exists and therefore can make further investments in the economy. Obviously, where the company exists overseas, money tends to flow out. But yes, sorry.
Cool. Yeah, when I think about that question around access to standard of care therapies and future clinical trials, I often think about daratumumab, which I know is of interest to several people in the crowd. Whilst I was at Janssen, we were really keen to have a CAR-T clinical trial site in New Zealand. It was something we petitioned for quite strongly, but obviously not having daratumumab funded, not having many patients who'd been experienced with daratumumab meant that we couldn't benefit from something like CAR-T, which would have been funded by the company. And I think, I know you can't talk to the specific...
Sorry, so the CAR-T was a Janssen product.
Yeah.
And daratumumab, standard of care, was the Janssen product.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, cool. I know you can't talk to the specific timings of when a medicine might be funded, and I understand a lot of those negotiations are commercially sensitive. But I think for the benefit of the patients who are keen to understand today, it's important to ask the question. So during the lengthy negotiations to fund daratumumab, many patients have tragically passed away. New Zealand remains one of the last developed countries to provide access to this treatment. So this raises an ethical concern about, are we prioritising price negotiations over human lives? What do you think it reflects about New Zealand that we are such an outlier in making this medicine available? And is this a result of financial constraints, or are we suffering from flawed decision making?
Yeah. So, I think what we're trying to do is to be more transparent with our decision making, and certainly during the process, as you described in the previous presentation, when we finally got the high recommendation from our Cancer Treatment Advisory Committee, and I think that was 21, wasn't it? We did the full assessment. We shared that assessment multiple times with Janssen and with consumers and with experts locally to make sure that indeed we did have the right information. As I said, our staff are so determined to make sure that we're taking all the evidence into account when we're making these decisions. People are passionate, they're serious, they're determined to get things right because, and if you cast your mind back to that chart, before 2022 there was a very long period where there was little investment in Pharmac. And so the only treatments that we could fund were treatments where we had released some value by negotiating hard with pharmaceutical companies to reduce their prices. And that was a really difficult time to be at Pharmac. When we got small wins, we rejoiced in those wins because we saw that we could get something when things were really difficult. Now that's a work story. That's not a life story. We know that was greatly reflected in the community who are really suffering. So we try and do things as well as we can.
I think to be...
It's been funded in the UK in
Yeah, but I think no one's denying it works. So it's not, I think, to be fair, and I can totally get your frustration, and that's again why we're tackling it. It's not one thing. It's actually a couple of things. One is we've been underfunding Pharmac for years. That's one thing. And then I think there is a need also to look at how we can try and speed up some of the processes and engagement, right? So I don't think it's one thing. Again, that's why we've asked Paula to look at a whole bunch of things. So, yeah.
Thank you. One more question for David, and then I'll release you from the hot seat. There's other blood cancer patients in the room outside of myeloma. Obviously, we hear a lot about daratumumab. There's many other medicines on that OFI, and blood cancer patients are looking at it thinking, is this going to be one of the 4 medicines that can be included within the budget uplift? And I know you mentioned before there are reasons why you can't say what those medicines are. Those negotiations are ongoing. Do you have any sense of timing, even very vague timing? Understanding this is really important for patients who are thinking, what happens at my next relapse? Do I need to sell my house? Do I need to move to Australia? Do I need to start a GoFundMe page? I know previously we'd heard the new funding arrangements done in tranches, and the first tranche had kicked off. Yep. Do you have any top line information around the next tranche and when we might see some more information?
Look, I am hopeful. As I said, these are live negotiations. That would suggest that there is, because they are indeed in tranches, we haven't started negotiating the last tranche. So I'm telling you what I can tell you, which is we are actively negotiating for a number of the blood cancer applications as we speak. Some of them overnight in the UK, weirdly. But yes. Okay. I mean, until you will hear about it when we put it out for consultation, yeah? So consultation occurs the minute we get a heads of agreement around the deal between the supplier and Pharmac, depending, sometimes it's the Pharmac board chair who signs it off, sometimes it's the CE, depending on how big the deal is. But we move very quickly from that signing to the consultation. At the time we release things for consultation, we are very confident that things will then move to being put on the list. There are times, occasionally, very, very rarely, but it does happen, where we put things out of consultation and they don't progress, and that's very upsetting for everybody, but it's very rare. But it does happen. Yes.
Can you blink twice if it's this year?
No, I better not. 3 times. What if I blink 3 times? Is that?
But perhaps something to consider, right? When we're looking to reform Pharmac, having set timelines and an understanding of when we can expect an outcomes. Yeah.
Well, and it would be so unfair to give you a date that we actually don't know because you're in negotiations.
Yeah.
And I think that David has given you the strongest indication that he possibly should. I'm giving him a look now, because by saying it's live negotiations, there ain't many we're doing that with right now.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not telling you.
Yeah. But we don't know either. I mean, that negotiation might take a week, it can take 3 months, it can take, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And perhaps this is my naivety, but when that budget was announced and it was celebrated as 4 blood cancer medicines, the assumption is that you already know what you can fund with that. That is based on the pricing you had on the table at the time, and these negotiations are additional to that. Am I
you're
misunderstanding?
I wouldn't say you were naive, but I mean, so what we have is an idea, a concept, yeah? And we test that concept out in negotiation and in consultation. So guess what happened with these ones that are about to be funded from Tuesday? So we very rapidly went in, we turned it round. Guess what happens when you do things quickly? You get things wrong, yeah? So our clinicians had said, Pembro for gut. Where was it? Pembro for bowel cancer, yeah? A number of people will be will require Pembro for bowel cancer. And we said, brilliant, excellent, that's the number. We put it in the spreadsheet, it came out and it said X million dollars. I won't tell you how much, but woo, painful. And we put it out to the consult, and the doctors came back and said, no, it's more than that. It's possibly $5 million more than that per year. And we went, okay. And so we had to go back and say, right, let's have a further negotiation. So those are, it's not naive, it's just, if you do things quickly, you do things kind of on the back of an envelope, and when you start to do the negotiations and further consultation, you get more detail, and you have to go back and renegotiate. As we did it in record time. Pembrolizumab will be in people's veins, hopefully Tuesday.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to take one more pre-written question before we move on and take questions from the floor, and this is for Paula. So new cancer treatments are often developed at a pace that's difficult for Pharmac to keep up with, and this is given their limited budget and their lengthy negotiation process, which I am now no longer naive to. Thank you, David. So whilst parallel Pharmac and MedSafe assessment speeds up the time taken to recommend funding, the actual funding outcome can take several years for these new treatments. Do you think New Zealand could consider new methods like special funds or programs to speed up access to cancer treatments, similar to what other countries do in the UK and Australia?
Just more money.
More money?
If we had more money, we'd do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just more money.
Yeah.
I don't agree with ring fencing because you're then playing a disease off something else, and for people that are, going through it, it's
Is that not what
it's
the
really
existing model inherently does?
what.
Pits disease
No,
types
not
off
at all.
against
It goes through the whole process that we've got in the clinical, but unfortunately, you want to fund 132.
Yeah.
And you just haven't got that, capacity to do it. So it's all evidence-based. It's not done with that. But it's just, it's just, the reason it takes so long is you haven't got the money to fund it. So there's been no money pretty much put in for years. And so you just sort of sit there and go, well, you can, no one's disagreeing with you that it's great, but if you haven't got the money, you can't fund it.
Perhaps we'll send this recording to Nicola Willis afterwards.
Certainly in the Pharmac review, there was a question of whether we should have a separate cancer pool, and the review did not agree to that because they, as Paula was saying, there were a number of reasons, but the biggest one was indeed saying that people who were experiencing cancer had more of a reason to have medicines funded than people without cancer. And people found that difficult.
And even the UK, remember, they changed their cancer fund into an early access fund, which talking about more money is possibly something we could consider because, again, the way the industry is moving is to more like risk share or pay per performance, right? They actually want to get paid for a positive outcome. And so again, I think over time we could think about those things. So, if the government doesn't have as much money, how can we extract or have different ways of paying for things? So again, it's all open from my perspective.
Awesome.
Questions, but yeah.
Just going to wrap this up in the quickest possible way, and that is to thank you individually and as a community for your self-advocacy and community advocacy as part of the blood cancer patient community, because that is the only reason that people like Rosie and I act and engage and set these things up. And I just wanted to assure you that this is just an hour and a half of a conversation that we are having on an ongoing basis with not just our panel here today, but Paula mentioned that there are workshops planned, and it's our job to be there and represent your voice, and we want to continue this discussion. And so please talk with us. But equally, advocacy doesn't work if people don't listen and don't give you their time and they aren't respectful of our views. And I think you can hear that. I think we're all frustrated, and I know, these are the people that are trying to get outcomes for us within the constraints that they face. and they give up their weekends and they come and they know that they're going to get a tough time. And I respect that. And, you actually give us hope. We've got 3 medicines coming for blood cancer that we wouldn't have had if we didn't self-advocate. We were outside and now we're inside, and we want more. That's not enough. But I really appreciate you being here today for the dialogue we've had before and what's to come. So thank you for giving us your time.